Good evening and welcome to Marlene's webinar Solidarity Action Group on August the 2nd, 2024. Tonight is going to be a very special night as we are doing a wonderful four amazing speakers tonight, and we're doing it on sovereignty, self-determination, and land back. Tonight we have Russell Diabo, who is a Mohawk from Ganawagi Nation, and also we have Scott Clark, who's co-Salish. We have, and will be speaking on the Douglas Treaty. We also have David Knox, Kwakiutl, and last but not least, we have Adam Gagnon. He is Dst'hyl from the Wet'suwet'en Nation. And we're just going to get, so now we'll just be drumming you in. To the heartbeat of Mother Earth. Thank you for joining us, and we're just going to get started right into it. We've been waiting for a little bit of a delay because we've had quite a few people coming in and signing on still. And I also would like to thank my co-host tonight, this evening, and we just met in the last few days, and Nikta is from the Salish Nation, and she will be my co-host. I want to say thank you ever so much for doing this for me, and we're going to just jump right into this because we have a full 2 hours. And so for the first speaker, we will have 25 minutes for each speaker, and we'll just have a very few minutes just for Q&A. But at the end of the evening, we will, however, have questions and answers for all four of the speakers. And I want to thank you so much for participating in this, and thank you from everyone coming from all over Canada. So we're just going to get right into this. And good evening, Russ Diabo. How are you doing today?
Good evening, Marlene. I'm doing good.
So you're going to just go right into, the topics tonight that we're dealing on sovereignty, self-determination, and on land back. And you're going to be starting with the National Action Plan with Trudeau's and that. So hi, Russell.
Hi. Okay, so I'll just get right into it. In 2015, the Liberal Party of Canada campaigned on a platform that included promises on Indigenous issues. And one of the promises was that they would have a new nation-to-nation relationship for reconciliation. And over the 9 years that they've been in power, we've seen them put in the reconciliation process in place, how they interpret it. And so I want to go through that. There's different components of it. It's a little bit hard to navigate because they haven't been upfront about what their intentions are, and they've been using a communication strategy to make everything sound pretty good. So what they're using is, well, I should say when the Liberals came to power in 2015, the Indian Act had already been in place for 148 years. And the Indian Act, it was the first law that it's still in place today. And it's the law that's used to control and manage status Indians, what are called First Nations today. And so the Trudeau government is taking a two-track approach. Canada has two constitutions: the Constitution Act 1867, which used to be called the British North America Act, and the Constitution Act 1982, which was passed, just over 30 years ago. And there's two heads of powers there that they're interpreting and using. Under the Constitution Act 1867, there's Section 9124. Section 91 are all the federal powers. Section 92 are all the provincial powers. So under federal powers is Section 9124, where the federal government has exclusive legislative authority for Indians and lands reserved for Indians. So the two-track approach, that's one track is using that. The other track is dealing with the Constitution Act 1982, which has Section 35. And Section 35 of that Constitution recognizes and affirms the existing Aboriginal treaty rights of Aboriginal peoples. And Aboriginal peoples are defined as Indians, Inuit, and Métis. And so in this two-track approach, they have two departments and two ministers, and it's to interpret the Section 9124 and Section 35. And so they dissolved the Department of Indian Affairs in 2019. It started in 2017, but it became official in 2019. And the two new departments are two new Indigenous departments, Indigenous Services Canada and Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada. So that's the two-track approach they're using to interpret the Constitution, Canada's Constitution. And in 2017, the Minister of Justice, Jody Wilson-Raybould, imposed 10 principles for Indigenous relationships to interpret Section 9124 and Section 35 of the Constitution, but also to interpret the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So they have two tracks, 10 principles for Indigenous relationships, and they have 4 policies to negotiate Section 35 Aboriginal treaty rights. The overall blanket policy is the inherent right to self-government policy, which Jean Chrétien imposed in 1995. That's still the main policy used for all negotiations with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. The second policy is the comprehensive land claims policy that dates back to 1973, following a Supreme Court decision called the Calder decision, which was split on whether Aboriginal title exists or not. So Pierre Trudeau and Jean Chrétien made a native claims statement announcing this comprehensive land claims policy for areas of Canada where there aren't land treaties, where there's still assertions or claims to Aboriginal title. So that's what the comprehensive claims policy is for, is negotiating what they now call modern treaties. The third policy is called lawful obligation, is specific claims, which has to do with the lawful obligations that the Crown owes to First Nations regarding any illegal taking of reserve lands or Indian lands or trust funds, mismanagement of trust funds. And so that specific claims policy was also, dates back to 1973 to Pierre Trudeau and Jean Chrétien. And the fourth policy is in addition to reserve policy. And that's the policy where you have to buy land back using the claim settlement dollars, mainly from specific claims. And then that goes into a policy and a process to get those pieces of land that were purchased by First Nations added to the reserve. So those are the 4 policies, which I call termination policies: the inherent right policy, the comprehensive claims policy, the specific claims policy, and the additions of reserve policy. So they have 2 tracks interpreting the Constitution. They have 10 principles for interpreting the Constitution and the UN Declaration. They have 4 termination policies to negotiate Section 35 Aboriginal treaty rights to end or replace them into a new relationship. And they have 4 BC-based national institutions that they created through legislation to help facilitate the transition of Indian Act bands and reserves into federal municipal self-government corporations. And that's the Lands Advisory Body and the First Nations Land Management Group is one of them. There's the First Nations Finance Authority, First Nations Management Board, and the First Nations Tax Commission. Those are three fiscal institutions that go with the land institution. So those four institutions were created through the First Nations Land Management Act by Jean Chrétien in 1999 when he was Prime Minister. And in 2006, although Paul Martin passed the First Nations Fiscal Management Act, it had been started by Jean Chrétien before he left office at the end of 2003. So those are the four national institutions created by legislation. The chairs and the boards of those four national institutions are appointed by the federal government and paid. Their salaries or honorariums are paid for by the federal government. And finally, we have the National Action Plan, which is based on a law, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, which was passed in 2021. And that act required the federal government to develop a national action plan to implement their interpretation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. They introduced that national action plan in June of 2022. And so now that national action plan is using those four national policies and the legislation, those four institutions, to transition Indian bands and reserves into what they call Indigenous governments, which Prime Minister Trudeau says are the fourth level of government in Canada. So that's the overview of the approach that they're taking and the different components that they're using. And I'll just drill down a little bit more into it. So one of the main things that they're doing in the National Action Plan, this UN Declaration National Action Plan, again, which is based on Canada's interpretation of it, is that they're going to repeal the Indian Act. They don't give a date for that, but they say they're going to do it. And basically, they're replacing that with the initiatives that they're doing now, the negotiation tables that they have across the country right now, which they call recognition tables. And that's based on, I should go back to point out that they're using the three national Indigenous organizations in this top-down approach to implement their idea of reconciliation in their interpretation of the UN Declaration. They're using the Assembly of First Nations. They're using the Métis National Council, and they're using the Inuit Teperizet of Canada. And each of those three national Indigenous organizations has a bilateral agreement with the federal government. And for AFN, the Assembly of First Nations, that bilateral agreement puts in place what they call a permanent bilateral mechanism. And basically what that means is it's setting up a joint AFN Canada process, which Canada really controls because they fund it and they set the agenda for it. But they say that it's co-developing. The agreement they signed with AFN says they're co-developing joint priorities. And that's following an agreement that they did with AFN in 2016, saying they're going to create a new fiscal relationship, which has led to these 10-year grants, capacity building grants for Indian Act bands to help them transition into Canada's definition of self-government, municipal self-government. And for those that have already gone into self-government, these self-governing First Nations, there's a self-government fiscal policy that came out of that agreement with AFN. And that self-government fiscal policy is based on own source revenue and taxation. So self-governing First Nations, when you go into self-government, you have to share the costs of governance and the costs of program delivery using your own source revenue and using your taxation powers. And the federal government's plan is then to reduce the federal transfer payments, and the Indigenous government has to make up the difference using their own source revenue and taxation powers. So that's already in place. And this joint priorities agreement between AFN and Canada that was signed in 2017 has been used to develop, as they say, jointly develop Indigenous legislation. So that's where the Indigenous Languages Act, or Bill C-91, came from. That's where the Indigenous Child and Family Services Act, or Bill C-92, came from. That's where Bill C-97, which was an omnibus law over 800 pages. It had a bunch of laws that it created and changed. In Bill C-97, which passed in 2019, is where the Department of Indian Affairs was dissolved and replaced with these two new Indigenous departments. Indigenous Services Canada and Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada. So that's why we have two departments, two ministers, and two approaches, because Indigenous Services Canada is just a temporary department until they transfer programs and build the capacity of Indian Act bands to transition into self-government and then be moved into Crown Indigenous Relations under a new relationship. And they already have 25 self-government agreements in Canada, affecting 40-some communities. They have 26 modern treaties. In terms of getting rid of the Indian Act, as they say they're going to repeal it in the UN Declaration Action Plan. They're going to also eliminate Indian reserves. And so in that approach, they're doing a reform of the specific claims process, not the policy, but the process. And they're redesigning the addition to reserve policy. So with the changes to the specific claims process and the addition to reserve policy, that's what they're using to help eliminate Indian reserves to go along with repealing the Indian Act. And so in the specific claims policy, if you settle, for example, if they promise to give a treaty in the historic, a reserve in the historic treaties on the prairies, instead of giving land back, they give money. And the band is expected to use part of that cash settlement to buy land, pieces of land, and then go into this addition to reserve process to get it added to the existing reserve lands. Well, now they have 3 land registries, so they want to get rid of the Indian Act Reserve Land Registry, and because they plan on repealing the Indian Act. So these national institutions are facilitating not only self-government, but moving bands out of reserves into what they call sectoral self-government or land codes. So you're opting out of 40 sections of the Indian Act dealing with reserve lands into another federal law called the First Nations Land Management Act. And under that Land Management Act, they've created a land registry for land code bands. And there's over 100 bands that have opted out of the Indian Act and opted into this First Nations Land Management Act and developed land codes. And there's 100 more that are in the process of developing land codes now, which the federal government calls sectoral self-government, because they only see it as a partial step towards full self-government, which would be self-government agreements or modern treaties, where your lands are replaced with private property or fee simple. And that's the third land registry they have, is a land registry dealing with self-governing First Nations who have self-government arrangements with the federal and provincial governments. So that's a process that's already underway. Like I said, there's 25 self-government agreements, 26 modern treaties, over 100 bands that have developed land codes, and 100 that are developing. So that's 200 bands that are moving in out of the reserve system into the land codes or self-government. And that's 1/3 of the bands in the country. So for anybody who thinks this process isn't happening, you need to look at the statistics, the facts of what's going on in terms of the self-government agreements that exist, the modern treaties that exist, and the land codes that exist or are under development. And basically, that process has been underway certainly since 2015. Some of it actually started before 2015. But over the last 9 years, the Trudeau government has reorganized itself to make sure that those processes are leading to their final objective of getting rid of the Indian Act and moving all First Nations, all 600 plus First Nations, into either self-government agreements or modern treaties. And also taxation goes along with this. That's what the national institutions, the fiscal institutions, are involved, because that's part of the own source revenue or cost sharing for self-government or modern treaties. Because there are 9 modern treaties in British Columbia, for example, out of the 26 that exist. Those 9 modern treaties all have similar provisions in them to pay taxes. Although the government has made some moves to restore the tax exemption that exists in the Indian Act. Section 87 of the Indian Act says property on reserve can't be taxed. And that's the section that's been used by the courts to interpret to say that income on reserve is not taxable because it's considered property on reserve. And the courts have extended that to connecting factors. And previous treaties like Nishka and Tawasin and that, they had clauses in there that they had to give up their tax exemption under the Indian Act. The federal government has now said, okay, they're going to restore some of that. But that still goes back to the fact that the funding formula, because under self-government, it's a funding formula, it's not a 10-year grant, or a contribution agreement, it's a funding formula, which is based on the money that Indigenous governments are bringing in. That's how they determine how they're going to reduce the transfer payment to these Indigenous governments. So all of this is available online. You can find the self-government fiscal policy online. With that, you can find information about the new fiscal relationship online, the 10-year grants. All of those national institutions have their own websites. The Lands Advisory Board, the First Nations Land Management Group, the fiscal institutions, you can find them online. The First Nations Finance Authority, the First Nations Financial Management Board, and the First Nations Tax Commission. And by the way, in order to be eligible for the 10-year grant, a band has to be certified by the First Nations Financial Management Board. You have to pass a fiscal law, a financial law, before you can be eligible for the 10-year grant. All of this information is available online that I'm presenting here. I'm not inventing any of this. I'm just putting it together, how the pieces fit together for the overall goal of achieving municipal self-government, or what they call Indigenous governments, which basically have the powers of a natural person at law, meaning a corporation. That's what a province does when they pass a municipal act and municipalities get charters. They have delegated powers from the province to the municipality. And so there's a list of subject areas that the municipality can pass laws over. That's how it works with the federal government. Parliament passing a self-government law or ratifying a modern treaty, it lays out the powers of that Indigenous government subject areas that they can pass laws over. And including the Indigenous Child and Family Services Act. Under that act, Indian band councils are defined as Indigenous governing bodies. And under that act, they're delegated to have lawmaking powers over Indigenous Child and Family Services. But it's based on the federal constitutional authority over Indians and lands reserved for Indians. Section 9124 of the 1867 Constitution. So all of these Indigenous governing bodies, which includes Métis and Inuit, when they pass laws over child and family services, it's delegated authority from the federal government using its constitutional authority under that first constitution, which is the constitution that colonized us. Because that's the 1867 Constitution is the one they used to pass the Indian Act in 1876, which is still in law today until they repeal it, which they plan on doing, saying that it's inconsistent with the UN Declaration. So that's my presentation, and I'm open to any questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you for that compelling speech that you have, Russell. We will just have a few minutes for questions and answers, and with the amount of time that we have on each speaker, if we could just keep the questions under about a minute, that would be very appreciative. And we're just going to go right into this. And thank you again, Russell, and we'll go on now on to the questions and answers. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, thank you. I have two more speakers just for Russell, and if we can keep them very brief, as we have three more speakers given to the time constraint that we have. And Gina May Schubert, I will ask you first. If so, thank you. You got less than a minute. Thank you, Gina.
Hawa, Osiamo Chika, I'm here on the unceded territory of Squamish First Nations. Nice to meet you. Nice to see you, Marlene, and everybody. Do you think there's any weight in that we have, or any power under the Royal Proclamation of 1763? Do you think we have any chance of just reclaiming our unceded territory because it's ours?
Well, the Royal Proclamation, recognized pre-existing rights. It didn't create them, but it's been used basically in one direction. It set up the treaty process. It said that if Indians wanted to, basically share their land with the Crown, it said only the Crown could buy the land, not individual settlers. If First Nations wanted to, or Indians, as they said in the language then, wanted to share their land or give it to the Crown, there had to be a public meeting for that, and that started the treaty process. And it's only been in one direction. The objective of the Crown has been to get the surrender of Aboriginal title, for over, I guess, 260 some years now. And there's no reversing under Canadian law. That's part of the problem. That's how they view the historic treaties, as basically ceding and surrendering the land on the prairies and that. Although that's not the view of the First Nations, the treaty nations. They view that they've shared it, not given it up. But the Department of Justice takes the view that they were ceded or surrendered. And if you look at the modern treaties, there's clauses in there from the James Bay Agreement. The James Bay Agreement says that something to the effect that any rights, titles, claims, or interests that they may have had are hereby ceded and surrendered. Same thing, there's a certainty clause in the Nisga'a Treaty. So that's the objective in the federal land claims policy. Now, in 2019, they came up with a new treaty negotiation policy in BC. They're being slicker about it. Section 18 of that 2019 treaty negotiation policy says it replaces the inherent right policy to self-government and the comprehensive claims policy. So that BC treaty negotiation policy, section 18, says the purpose is to reconcile the pre-existing title of Indigenous groups with the assumed sovereignty of the Crown. It doesn't say asserted sovereignty, it says the assumed sovereignty of the Crown. And it says that section says that they won't require a modification or changes to title unless the groups agree. And at the negotiating table, the provinces and the feds, have more weight in the negotiations than First Nations. And they wind up, if you look at the 9 modern treaties in BC, they've all agreed to modify their title and rights to the terms of the modern treaties. So, and like I said, they're only recognized title by legislation for the Haida, not for the mainland. So my view is the BC and the federal government's plan is to get First Nations in BC to basically surrender to assume Crown sovereignty through these modern treaties. And there aren't any, they have so-called reconciliation agreements, but there is no reconciliation policy written. They're just doing, basically group by group agreements, because the government has said, the BC government has said the highest form of reconciliation is through modern treaties. So that's their objective. And unless First Nations can get together, I'd say they're going to pick them off, the ones that aren't in the BC treaty process now. You know, they'll just wind up lining up behind everybody else because there is no alternative. And unless First Nations work on an alternative approach, the government's processes win.
Thank you for that, Russell. I'm just taking one more question because we have to go on to my next speaker, and I'm going to be asking Judy Masson if you could keep it less than a minute. Thank you so much, Judy.
Perfect. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Yes.
Okay. I'm on the side of the road, so I love this. I absolutely love this. I just want to say thank you to putting this on, and I'm really excited to hear, well, I'm not excited to hear what we heard, but I'm actually really, I'm stunned. But I want, my question to Russ is, what are the recommended actions that we can do? Like what, I know what the issues are, I understand the whole court process, but I really would like to know what recommendations that you think in your mind that we can all do in order to stop this from happening before our children have to go into leadership roles and do this fight. Thank you.
So what I've been telling basically band councils and communities is because the court has put the burden of proof on us, we don't have any choice but to do research, mapping, and planning for our territories. So cultural and historical research, most communities haven't done that. We're not good at archives and databases, but we need to train our youth in getting good at those tools to work with our elders on bringing that traditional knowledge together with these modern tools, you know, of recording their stories. Mapping, we need to have GIS capacity to do mapping of land use and occupancy, figuring out how our territories are blanketed by permits and licenses by the provincial government everywhere that they've issued mining permits, exploration permits, logging, forestry licenses, logging permits, all the third-party alienation that they've been doing, which has already been done. We need to put that on maps so our people can see that. And we need to identify key cultural and environmental areas for us right away to buffer and protect those from further development for our use, for our values into the future. And we need to do a strategic land and resource plan, a territorial plan. So that's the process. We have to do a culture of research. We have to get that going in our communities because industry and government have all that. We don't. And we're at a disadvantage because, like I said, they're assessing, they're doing a threat assessment through the referral process to determine if they have to accommodate us or not. And more often than not, they don't accommodate us because we don't have the evidence to push back with. And even when you do, it's still a fight. So I think we need to use technology like this to network. We need to create a grassroots network and movement to put some heat on our leadership too, because our leadership has, basically gotten comfortable and are accepting these processes. They've bought in, I'm going to say it right out. I think the BC First Nations Leadership Council accepted, kind of a lot of this rhetoric from the BC government that they're implementing the UN Declaration, when in fact they're implementing their interpretation of it, which hasn't changed things on the ground for the people. And unless we get organized as a people's movement, I don't see things changing, either in BC or across the country. That's what I've been telling people, is we need to, have like another I don't know more kind of movement happening, but we need to be more strategic. Like I said, we need to support our communities to do that research, mapping, and planning, because that's the long-term stuff. If we want to survive as distinct organized societies, we're going to need to have those. We need to be good at information management.
Thank you so much for that, Russell. And Judy, thank you for that. You'll be our last question for Russell. We do have to move on with our next speaker.
Yeah,
and,
sorry I took so much. The other speakers,
it's all good.
I want to hear them too.
Yes, exactly. And also, we will keep putting up all of the where you can get Russell, you can get a hold of him. His website will be on the chat line as well. Thank you so much for that, Russell. It is not a problem. Our next speaker is, I met him July 1st, and in Victoria, I stood beside him and the two chiefs sitting there with Gramalosa when Scott Clark from the Salish was giving his talk about the Douglas Treaty. Scott, how are you doing? And welcome again for coming on. And I know that you are you're a busy person like everyone else is like putting the time out for this important event is just so welcoming. And how are you doing? Hi, Russell. Hi, Scott.
Hi, Marlene. Can you hear
Oh,
me?
there you are.
You can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. You can't see me because it says the host has disabled my camera. So I guess that's on you.
Oh, well, let's fix that. Do you want to check up on that?
Boom, boom. I push video and it says you cannot start your video because the host has disabled it.
Nikta will take a look at it.
Okay, so while that's getting done, perhaps I'll do, first of all, I put my hands up in appreciation to you, Marlene, for organizing this very, very important dialogue between four different unique perspectives. I know Russ's work. I'm on his Facebook stuff. I share it. He's simply the best policy critic in so-called Canada. So I always welcome the opportunity to listen to the framework of neo-colonialism that this government or governments call reconciliation. And it says, let's see, just like that. This thing's just talking to me now, the video thing.
There
Can you see
are.
me now?
I see your finger. Yeah, there you are.
Cool. So I am Salish. I'm Clallam, which means strong people. The Salish nation has 21 dialects. Most folks don't realize that. They also don't know that over half of our people are on the American side. So when they created that 49th parallel, they cut the Salish nation in half. And then, of course, we're still battling those battles. But, there's this popular saying out there saying LandBack. And I think about that. And, all these kids are out there writing it all over the place and doing it on social media, LandBack. And, we need to be, like Russ is saying, more strategic. What we really need is our nations back. Our language-based nations, not band councils. Canada has 634 of them across Canada. 204 of those band councils are in what we now call British Columbia, almost a third of them. What we call BC is actually home to 36 Indigenous languages, nations, laws, tribes, cultures. It's one of the most richest places on Turtle Island for diversity of Indigenous groups, tribal groups. It's a beautiful place with beautiful diversity, different ways of marriage patterns, of leadership patterns, of trading, all of this that's been destroyed in the short time that British Columbia has become a province and joined Canada. So I'm really pleased to be part of this here. And my audience isn't the government. They don't listen. They don't give a shit about us. Like Russ is being very generous. They're dictating what the process is. They're dangling money at the table. If you don't get to be part of that process, unless, of course, you agree to their terms. And that applies to virtually everything they've been doing. I think it was 2008, 2010, I'm not sure. I'm getting a little long in the tooth myself. 35 years of my life committed to advocating on behalf of our folks. But it was the Prime Minister of the day, it was 2010, Stephen Harper, and he was at the G7 or G20 meeting in Pittsburgh, USA. And he got up to the world and he says, Canada has no history of colonialism. And I was a young buck in college at the time, or university, and I was just floored. How could a prime minister get in front of the G7 or the G20 and say that Canada has no history of colonialism? And the media didn't jump on them. In fact, I don't even think the political leadership of the day jumped on them for that. There's a bubble in Ottawa. And to be part of that bubble means to alienate yourself from the real issues of the Indigenous populations, whether it's urban, rural, remote, whether it's band councils on reserve or off reserve or in the cities. There's an agenda that's being driven down our throats that Russ explained. And most of our folks don't have a clue. They don't know how these things are interconnected and how it's just an extension of the 1969. They don't know because they're too busy trying to protect their children, trying to get food on their table, get their kids to school. So it's a government, a corporatocracy-driven government that's driving these processes down our throats because they need to get some type of stability to continue to exploit all of the resources in all of our nations here on the West Coast. That's what's really going on right now. I'm pleased to be part of this process because I looked at a few of the names here, and I want you folks like Howard Green. I know Howard. I mean, he's out there on the front lines. I think he just got sentenced not that long ago for standing up for old growth. But we need to find new ways, innovative ways that we build real alliances in the areas, in all areas across what we call Canada. Now, I'm interested in Howard because he's in my territory. I'm a Douglas Treaty descendant. I'm Chewayitsin, Ko Salish, Klalam, Chewayitsin. That's who I am. I'm a headman. I'm a grandfather. I've got 3 grandchildren. I don't know how much longer I got to do the work I've got to do, but I want to make sure that there's a sustainable strategy in place for the next generation to take their place at the table or at the highway blocking. Because there is no honor in Canada. There is no honor in British Columbia. And there is no honor in these municipalities that are implementing this distinctions-based approach of really glorified apartheid. That's what it is. You're an Indian if you're on your reserve or your modern treaty, as they call it. I know this shit because my band council was doing this for 30 years. I'm not just talking. I don't know how much money they got from the feds or the my band council hasn't had an annual general assembly in 20 years. 20 years. That means the band members have never had input on the Indian Land Management Act when they accepted it, or these fiscal transfer agreements that Russ is talking about, or the so-called modern. Here we are fighting the colonial state to ensure that we're at the table so that we can provide our free, prior, informed consent on everything we do. And then the very Indian Act chief and councils, and mine is one of many, that don't want anything to do with their membership. They don't want to be accountable. I'm not here to glorify any band council. They've done nothing but harm to my family for 3 generations, 4 generations, harm. They refuse to help my family because of whatever Indian Act policies. Those are Indian Act agents. They draw their authority from the Indian Act, 1876. Legislation that was put in place as a holding space until we actually died off and assimilated into the Canadian fold. Folks need to know that. Our folks need to know that. Our allies need to know that. I'm not a romantic. I like to do the work that I do based on what I think I can get some success for the next generation. I teach my kids. I have 3 sons. All my sons, I've been educating them all the way through. That's my job, and many others. It's our job to do that, to educate them, because they're the ones that are going to have to take this on when we're not able to do it anymore. Now, I come from a place, I got a Douglas Treaty, 1850. Before BC was created, there were 2 colonies here on the West Coast. And that was Vancouver Island, which I think before that they called it Quadra. And then the mainland. And then they cut a deal, or actually in 1850, 1850 to 1854, Britain was getting concerned with all the settlers now starting to settle in the area beyond the fur trade and the mining and so forth. And so they wanted to settle in the area. They needed the treaties. And so they told Governor Douglas of the day, they said, hey, listen, you better go negotiate some treaties with those Indians because we don't want any wars. So Douglas replied back, he's going like, hey, I don't have any money and I don't know what I'm doing. How can I do anything with that? Like, I got no money and I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to negotiate treaties. But he did 14 of them between 1850, and mine was May 1st, 1850, the Chuaitsin. The Kwakiutl, which is also Klallam, that was May 1st, 1850. And then they went on to do another 12 to 1854. So he didn't know what he was doing. So he took the Maori Treaty of New Zealand and reconstituted that 14 times. So we have a direct linkage to our Maui brothers and sisters down there. So I watch what they do down there and how they've used their treaty to get some type of semblance of power to protect themselves against, in that case, New Zealand. That's a lot of information I'm sharing with you, but it's my lived reality. And so I got a band council that claims to represent our 2 Douglas treaties. Indian Act Band Council. If it was Klallam people running that band council, I probably wouldn't be so cynical. But they're actually run by Nuu-chah-nulth people. I have Nuu-chah-nulth people on my village site running my band council for the last 30 years. I had a white woman that was Indian Act chief for 10 years. 10 years, 5 2-year terms. That's the Indian Act. It's just like we're allowed to be pissed at the Indian Act. I don't know why we're not. Like Russ said something, I disagreed with him. He was saying something about, they haven't really done much over the last 9 years and they're whatever on top of it. Well, actually, they've done a tremendous amount of damage to our people. They're not shooting us in the streets like we see in Palestine. But what we do see is our people dying from overdoses, 20% of the population in BC. 45% of the homeless population are Indigenous people. 62% of the children in care, they're still stealing our kids, our kids. Over 50% of the missing murdered Indigenous women and girls in BC and across this are Indigenous. The prison population since Trudeau and NDP took over, we were 30% of the prison population. Today, I just met with the folks, it's 33%. So while all this money is being transferred over to these different band councils, or as Russ was saying, the AFN, ITK, MNC, why are conditions getting worse under the era of so-called UNDRIP, or UNDA as they call it? Why is it getting harder for our people? The Liberals won't answer that question. The NDP certainly ain't going to answer. The Indian Act chiefs aren't going to answer that question. So the solutions in my mind are going to come from people that are on this call and the people that are going to hear this, because we have to start organizing in the areas that we come from, and we have to start strategically fundraising. I look at what happened at Fairy Creek, and that band council cutting deals with this forestry company for peanuts to kill the last 1% of ancient growth there. The largest number of people arrested, over 1,200 people. But you know, there's a lot of good people in this world, and they want to make a difference. And they donated well over, I don't know, it's well over almost $2 million for those defenders, protectors. So we need to be innovative. We need to sit there and start networking, outreaching, coming together, creating a real people's movement, not a band council movement, not an Indian Act movement, not another Idle No More movement, or before that, the 1% movement. We need something sustainable, something that we can use to educate our young people, educate our non-Indigenous allies on how they can effectively support us in the courts, in the streets, in institutions like labor unions and so forth. Because my number one concern, I've been around the sun 62 times. I think I got another 10 more spins around that sun where I can continue to do the advocacy I got to do. And number one of that is allies, sustainability, education. Our children have to come into their power, whether they're Indigenous or non-Indigenous. We have a word here that we use, it's natsama. We are all one. We are all connected. What you do to me, you do to you. And what we do to the planet, we do to everything. So there's massive changes happening in the world right now if you've got your eyes open. It's no coincidence what's happening in Ukraine. Canada is part of that. It's no coincidence what's going on in the Middle East. Canada is part of that. And they're pushing for another war over in China. The Western colonial hegemon model is being defeated over there. In Africa, 7 or 8 countries kicked France out, kicked the USA out. We're walking into a new space. And so my biggest concern is, how do we preserve a struggle for the next generation? How do we build allies? I am organizing on Vancouver Island, actually. We are organizing the Douglas Treaty Forum for the hereditary chiefs, the matriarchs, the advocates, and the allies, because it's never happened before. See, Canada is so much in a rush to settle the title and rights in this country. They're ramming this stuff down our throat. Trust me, I sit at those tables federally. I see it. They don't give a rat's ass about our people. They care about settling this stuff with that municipal style fee simple self-termination model, giving up our internationally recognized rights as human peoples of the world. I am co-Salish of the world, not Canada. Canada, we're going to have an election soon. It doesn't matter which party's in place, but I tell you this. I mean, life is too short to be colonized. Life is too short to be colonized. It's time we start killing the colonizers and saving the child. Because the Western hegemon of colonial, Christian, capitalist systems are not sustainable. They're not. And so we have the answers. All of our tribal peoples along the West Coast, we have the answers. That's not just words. Those aren't just words. We lived here for thousands of years. We married out, married in, traded, existed, warred. But Canada's only been here for 150 something years. Will they be here in another 150 years? I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. So I'm not giving up. I'm going to continue the good fight. I really appreciate the opportunity to share with your folks that are here, Marlene. And if you're in BC, Vancouver, anywhere in BC, connect with us, because we, not the band councils, not these, the people that are pushing for real change, not a slogan, not because I want to get a bunch of likes, but real change. We need to bring those people together. And once we bring those people together, they collectively will figure out how we're going to develop a strategy to move forward to protect not just our people, our nations, but all the lands that are unceded Indigenous territory. Put my hands up. I'm getting all excited here. I'm going to shut this off.
Okay, thank you so much, Russ. Scott, I think we have time for a few questions for Scott, and I would like to have some new people asking. We only could, if you do have a question for Scott, could you please keep it under a minute? We still have two more speakers coming up, and just put your hands up. And I love how, Scott, you mentioned, the new generation is what we're talking about, what's going to be there for them in the next little while, the 8th generation. You have three huge reasons why you put the fight, what you do, and exactly for me, why I am here doing what it takes to be getting the work done. And I feel that, that there is a lot of allies that are really pushing, is how I met you on July 1st. I was your ally, and I was in there solidarity for you. I drummed for you, I listened to you, and you did that, you did something to the Douglas Treaty. It was all due. Maybe you can mention what you did that day.
Yeah, sure. What I did on May 1st, 2024, I did both actually.
Okay.
I did two of them. Canada Day, myself and Hereditary Chief David Knox, who's Kwakiutl, and Marlene showed up, and several others when Canada was doing their Canada Day celebration. We went to the original site of Fort Victoria, where many of the Douglas treaties were signed. And we held a press conference there stating that we're not here to celebrate Canada Day. There's unfinished business with the 14 Douglas treaties, and never has the colonial state ever upheld the honor of the crowns as it relates to our Douglas treaties to this moment. And that's how I met Marlene and others, and that's how it happened. And I'm still meeting others from that too, Marlene. I'll meet more through this event. So that's how I did meet Marlene doing that one event.
When I heard many people that were going down there, I just said, I will see you there in 5 minutes. This is the perfect opportunity for me on so-called Canada Day to run into the right people, not doing what other people were doing. So it was very fitting and very awesome to have met you. And it's something that our next speaker had mentioned today, that we have to percolate the coffee. We have to percolate it put it on very slow, because we will meet again for that next coffee. I thought that was very well put, and thank you ever so much, Scott. And we will be having a Q&A after. I've got one person who's got a question for you, and Charlotte Human has questions. Charlotte, hi, how are you doing?
Hello, Scott. It's good to hear you again. And I just wanted your contact information, if that could be put in the chat, please. Thank you.
Sure. You can do that, Marlene?
Yeah, we can do that. It will be done before the end of the night. Charlotte is my sister.
Thank you
I'll
very
pass
much.
it on to her. And thank you. And I've got 2 more participants with their hands raised, but I can't see who they are because of this. Joan Rosso, how are you, Joan? Hi, Joan. You just have to get yourself off of mute. She always has a there. Hi, Joan.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you, Joan.
Okay. Thank you for this inspiring talk. And, you know, I was always inspired when I was at the UN when they were discussing an UNDRIP. And I thought this was really going to change things. I think it's been completely misinterpreted. I was there in 2007 when Canada stood before the UN saying they were not going to adopt it. And I think they knew that it was a very important treaty. That's why they didn't want to adopt it. And now they're just undermining it completely. I think I'm very inspired by what you're doing. And I'm very annoyed at how this treaty, this declaration is so poorly interpreted. And because of the reasons you said, because of the money that's been offered to a number of First Nations, and it's undermined. It's just terrible. That was not the intention of the treaty, and I mean of the declaration. So thank you very much.
Can I respond to that, Marlene?
Yes, absolutely.
People need to realize that UNDRIP, an exercise that took well over 3 decades, and probably Russ was part of it. Canada was the second to last nation in the world to endorse it. The second to last. You can imagine who the last was. I don't have to tell you that. Well, BC was this so-called progressive NDP government. They're so like, we're going to be the first Western government in the Western world to adopt UNDRIP through Bill C-41 or 41 or whatever it is. And, you know, it's hilarious because they passed it during the pandemic. They didn't consult. It's United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. They didn't consult any peoples. They just told the Indian Act chiefs, this is what we're going to do, blah, 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 blah. They get the headlines, it gets passed, and oh, they're all thinking they're beautiful. Well, then Canada turned around and adopted it through, they call it the UNDA, United Nations Action Plan or whatever they call it, doesn't even matter. It doesn't matter. So they passed it after that. And again, they didn't consult Indigenous peoples. They're just driving this stuff down our throats. So what we did very recently in my work here in Vancouver is we sent 6 Indigenous youth to the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous issues in New York a couple months ago, 2 or 3 months ago. 6 of our youth, very well-informed youth, and got them to do a presentation there and present our information, because part of our strategy is to now shame Canada at the international arena, such as the UN Permanent Forum. There's many other forums where we have to start shaming Canada. We have to start thinking about going back to Britain, because that's where our treaties are with. And those are just some of the things that we know we have to do. But we have to shame Canada. 9 years of reconciliation and 9 years Everything is virtually getting worse for our people, urban, rural, remote, so-called Canada. But you got some fat cats who got big wallets right now, but the conditions are getting worse and zero accountability. I thought reconciliation was supposed to hurt the colonizer, but no, it's killing our people today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Scott. I will now be going to our very next speaker today, and he has arrived in the house. I'm so happy to hear. David Knox, how are you doing? And I was
doing
really,
great.
he's been traveling, and he just got here just totally in time he's been traveling the last 4 hours. And from Kwakiutl, how are you doing, David?
Oh, I'm doing very good in Salish right now. Fort Rupert is where I'm from.
Right.
Like Marlene was bringing up what I was just at. I was busy repainting one of my grandfather, Mungo Martin's son, David Martin, a big house he built in Comox, and Sam Henderson designed the front, and Junie Henderson's there, and it was carved for Andy Frank. So Carver Everson's great grandfather. So we got three of us cousins uniting, showing our youth how to work together and how to preserve the future. It was painted by people that should not painted it, so we're getting it back to its original form lines. And I know the designing because I've been doing lots of my great grandfather Mungo Martin, all of his totem poles all around the world right now. And yeah, so on this note, I thank you for inviting me back again, and it's always great to be able to have to try well, just to educate, to teach, to fathom the reality of what we, the people of the Indigenous land, have been struggling through since being colonized. And I'm gonna go date back to the beginning. I'm gonna throw some quick timelines out. You know, like 18. Well, I mean, we're commemorated 10,000 years here in Fort Rupert. 92 miles up the coast, top end of Carwood Island, outside Rivers Inlet at Wikunu. We date back 14,000 years, which equals 700 generations. So equal that to those 1,000-year-old mother tree life trees. We saw those 14 times 1,000-year-old trees, but the more we dig, the more we are from this land. And to touch about the coastal community back in the day before USA and Canada, we were one big coastal, just loving, caring community. There's warfare. There's always some kind of warfare. But the chiefs would intermarriage with neighboring nations to be able to gain resource to that territory. So 14,000 years of this whole Pacific Coast rim living sustainably, comfortably together. And like I said, there was warfare, but the warfare was only with one person. They wouldn't raid the whole village. That's why some of those old pictures in the early 1800s from the documentation of Franz Boas and all those guys, and it shows one house is all fenced up. That's the one that another nation was at battle with, not with all the people, just that one family. You know, that this history is so unbelievable, because we, as Indigenous people to this coastline, we all have our own origin story. We believe in the sky, the land, the ocean, the supernatural world, but we have our own story. We have our own dialect, and some of our dialect, that's why it's called dialect, is kind of the same, but not really, and means different terms, how you use it. We had potlatch words that we use in everyday language. Sometimes everyday language we use in the potlatch meant different because we're on the potlatch. Because we, the people of the coast, we're potlatching people. We're feasting people. The oldest laws are to share, to care, to help, and to feed, and to love. You know, and those got broken down after the boat people came. And now we've been struggling for 200 years because in 1836, Fort Simpson was established up near Prince Rupert. And they got wind 1 year later, Fort Rupert had coal. I'm from Fort Rupert. That's Dst'hyl, the northern tip of Vancouver Island. So they come this way. So hence why the banning of the potlatch in 1884 and slash the Sundance. They banned the Sundance. That's the interior way. We call them Lachwillies. Anything from the Rockies that way, they're Lachwillies. Means that they're from the east, you know. And what a tremendous step put forward by Hudson's Bay. And I got the staff. I got to show you the staff. this staff has been in my family since Hudson's Bay ever came here. This was gifted by King George to one of my great uncles way back in the day. We had Union Jack flags and other stuff, but my father sold them off in his late years before he passed a decade ago. But this is one thing I have left that's from King George way back in the day when Hudson's Bay first come to my territory, established the second or the third fort in British Columbia is Fort Rupert, because you got one up in Heiltsuk territory too, besides Fort Simpson. And yeah, so this history of being colonized, and it stems to resource extraction. I hate to say it, hence why my nation, Fort Rupert, has 2 Douglas treaties that were signed in 1851 in the springtime. And I've been to get this. It's funny. I got the Maoris, Scott. I got the Maoris coming over here in a few weeks. I just had a Zoom meeting yesterday, so we're talking about the Douglas treaties. So they're going to bring me what info they could gather about the Maori Douglas Treaty once that was signed, and it was, anyways, that's another note. But this history, and then in our Indian Act, it was 1874. In 1921, Dan Kramer had a potlatch where 38 of my community, like Kwakiutl, Kwakiutl, Numgis, Moosamut, Dst'hyl, and they were potlatch in 1921, and they 38 got arrested just for singing and dancing and gifting out gifts to the people. Because our potlatching, reason potlatching is important, we lift our youth, we prize our youth so much. And it's so important to engage our youth, even at today's level. I'll get into that in a moment after, but I'll keep talking this timeline in history. That 1921, so we're running by Indian agents from 1884 until 1960 when they made us have counselors. So that's 90 years of being run by Indian agents, and then that 1921, that's when they threw us heavy into the residential schools. That's where lots of our children went missing. All of my ancestors, the whole coastal ancestors all across Canada, they started going missing after 1920-ish, because that's when they threw us heavy in the residential schools. And they won't find much up in Alert Bay, because I hate to say it, just talking raw truth, they had a boiler system up in St. Mike's in Alert Bay, so they weren't buried, they were incinerated. And we've always heard these stories since I was so young about our ancestors. And there's part of the reality about colonization, misinterpretation back in the day by the boat people and the missionaries. They thought we worship our totem poles, but no, it shows us who we are, where we come from. They couldn't fathom potlatching, why we gather so much resources and distribute it. That's the way we were. And some chiefs would have up to like 4 to 8 wives, but they sustained them all. And they to the boat people in the church, that was so uncalled for. Hence why the change or the shift of evolution and our values and protocols really changed after 1920. So doing my research, I always go pre-1900s. And I'm a little fortunate. My father was brought up by his grandparents who were born pre-1900. So my dad was raised with all these old traditions, values, protocols, and my father embedded in me. I got some other cousins my age. I'm 50 now. I'm half a century. And I've been so fortunate to do what I do, to walk the life I walk, to be a part of everything. Talking about stewardship, I've been a hardcore fisherman 30 years. I've seen it all. And now I'm just advocating for the rights for all Indigenous people of the land, about equality. It's like Indigenous solutions are the solutions. But back to this timeline, in 1951 was uplifting of the potlatch ban from 1884. So 1951, the government goes, oh, uplifting the potlatch ban. And back in the day, my great-grandfather, Mungo Martin, I was born in 1881 here in the springtime in Fort Rupert. What my great-grandfather did was so unbelievable. That's him in these pictures behind me. There's one picture, that's him in 1886. He was born in 1881. This picture was taken right down on the coast, like half a mile from where I live. That's another picture of him back in the 50s. So this history we have is so like, wow. And what our ancestors have done to make us who we are today, a lot of the nations lost it. Mungo taught the Haidas, the Tsimshians, how to sing, how to carve again, because smallpox pandemic amplified the whole coast. Fort Rupert, we were 10,000 strong. We went down to 178. We're finally back up to 952 in 2024. It's like there's so much to fathom, but just talking about what my great-grandfather done and me carving on the big house, his only son carved back before the 60s, and I'm helping to repaint that and get it back to its original state. It's just like, it's so important just to, not to shame, not to blame, but to talk about the history that was put forward that's always been swept under the carpet. No more sweeping under the carpet. It's time to amplify. It's time to send the truth, to realize, hey, how do we make so wrong to make it right? How do we do that? It's working with our youth. Breed up all of this new generation that's sustainable, not codependent. You know, and right now, where I live in Fort Rupert, northern tip of Vancouver Island, a little town called Port Hardy, there's 3 other nations amongst us. And since Christmas time, I can't fathom this number of members we lost to bad drugs, fentanyl. Suicide is at its highest level I've ever seen before. And the alcoholism is the worst I've ever saw it right now. You know, I'm working on this Georgia Lake, well, gas is a frog, trauma, land-based healing, wellness center. We're so close. I'm at 3.4 million, hope to build that up to 10, 12. So we, the people, want to heal. And I'm such an activist, like talking for the forest, talking for the ocean. You know, I've been on the front line so I could talk how I talk, and that's how I could amplify my messages to the world, because, you know, I've been on the front lines. I was on the dragger for 5 years, where we drag a net on the bottom of the ocean, and to date, through the scientific data in 15 years, that's the worst implementation for the green, like just for the carbon footprint, period, because the bottom of the ocean's never been touched like how they're touching it today. And it's such a sad devastation. And now they're stirring up all the hardcore minerals and oils, and then our fish are consuming that through their gills, and we're consuming the fish now. So there's a lot of variables we could talk about. The deforestation, you know, there's a law, 1913, Royal Commission, here in Fort Rupert, 500-meter buffer zones each side of the river. We're lucky we got 5 to 10 meters right now through the Ministry of Forestry, allowing industry just to clear cut these ancient 1,500-year-old trees. There's a reason why we call them Mother Tree of Life. Like, I'm out for logging, do it sustainably, take out the ones rotting, take the ones blowdowns, but keep the pristine ones. I'm so fortunate. I've been working with Dr. Suzanne Simard through UBC Science of Forestry, and Dr. Jennifer McCrees. I just had them up in my territory this past week with a group of 68 of them, all different levels of scientists and activism and doctors and scientists. They did so much field work for me just this short little while, because this data is so important. So I could slap the government saying this wrong. I heard earlier, 1%. My nation, 5 watersheds of Fort Rupert, we got 3% of the oldest growth left. Yet I got a letter from Ministry of Forestry saying they're taking 70% of that 3%. We're keeping 30. You know, I wear 2 hats. I'm a hereditary chief, so I was brought up with these strict moral traditions. But in 8 months, I've been on Indian Band Council, and I'm the only one on council that could talk this history and talking about our neighboring territories, and I talk about that old history that's so needed, because watching through all levels of nations in British Columbia, they're adapting the modern day treaty. We, the people that ain't in modern day treaty, we're suffering because the province allows them to submit maps in, and it's overlapping. And the province tells us that's our problem. We have to deal with it internally, but yet the province allows them to submit these maps. But just coming up this next elections, we got a brand new Ministry of Forestry. That guy that's been in there for a long time, he's resigning. I think he's been in there 22 years. And that's under the Ministry of Forestry under the province. But yeah, so we got a lot of variables, a lot of great stuff. I'm going to talk about some good stuff real quickly because I'm looking at my time. You know, I'm working on these land-based knowledge camps with the youth. We're building them traditional style, and we got 2 of them just coming up right now. And this stems to language, to wellness, and it engages all the youth and the younger elders. And I'm going to build one on shore for the youngest youth and the oldest elders. And they're land-based knowledge camps. So learning the seasons is everything. When do you harvest? How do you dry? How do you cure? Talking about medicines, talking about hunting, fishing, to smoke, to preserve, to cure, and how to look after properly, and to be proper, sanitization, so you don't get no one sick. And it stems to culture. Culture is everything. If I don't have my oil growth or my salmon, I cannot be me. To me, through 30 years watching the level of this ugly, but longer, through resource extraction, it's another culture of genocide for all Indigenous people on the coast, because there's going to be no more trees to carve our canoes, no more trees to carve these monumental totem poles, no more big timbers to carve our big houses. Many nations want to do this because we know culture is the key to heal, and to be on the land is healing. And that culture on the shacks, it stems to like designing, just making your regalia, weaving, making baskets, carving a canoe, carving paddles, learning to carve a plaque, learning how to carve masks. But like I always say, every family from every nation has their own origin story. So we're all kind of different in a different realm, but we're all have the same principle, values, and protocols. And that's what's so needed. So my key right now is to teach and to educate, to make awareness, not to shame, not to blame. Man, we could pop Canada like a pimple on a heartbeat if we really wanted to, but we got to percolate this in a good way to strategize for the future. And I've learned, don't be desperate, just keep talking about the messages that we're sending out to the world about what happened, because our Canada, it's 157 years old, and this stick behind me, that's from King George. So we were under British law back in the day, way back in the day when Hudson's Bay first came here, and also, and I don't know, it's like, I'm about to go on a trip to go say hi to the king, because my great grandfather carved a totem pole for the 100-year anniversary for Canada. So I'm going over to England soon. I'm trying to fathom my speech to the king. I got to be cautious, otherwise he won't let me in if I say crown land back. But yeah, so anyways, what else? Oh, there's so much, always embrace happy thoughts, always help, always educate. Education is the key right now, to make awareness, to educate, and like right now with this big house in Comox, with me and my other 2 cousins, we're uniting, we're showing the youth how to work together, because I'm 50, from the age from 20 to 50-year-olds, there's a gap of lostness. So how do we connect? And I know it's with the land, and embrace the culture, learn who you are, where you come from. It's so important right now, just to, I'm doing my best. So I'm starting with the youngest, like I say, I'm 50 years old. My oldest son's 28, my daughter's 25, and I got a 5-year-old. If it wasn't for my 5-year-old, I would not be doing what I'm doing today, to think about how to fathom when he's my age in 45 years, doing what he's going to be doing for all our people also. So like I say, we the Indigenous people, we're always mindful. We're never greedy. We always think about the future, because we're only here for the moment. But a lot of people are corporate greed. If we don't watch sustainability right now, we're in for industrial collapse. That's what's happening right now in all levels of the world, industrial collapse. So how do we just I don't know, how do we heal? Anyways, with happy thoughts. And I think I said what I had to say for now, Marlene.
Since we met at COP15, you have jumped up heaps and bounds. I thank you so much, David Knox. We met in Montreal here, and ever since then, we've been, our paths have always been crossing. And it was also very nice to stand with you yourself, and also Scott Clark on July 1st in Victoria when you're talking about the Douglas Treaty. And not only that, is that this is not your first time in my webinar. You were on sometimes last year when I had the segment of the making of a great chief, and it was all about honoring your blanket. It was all about how you looked after your people. You're a fisherman. You fed them with one big boatload of fish. You took some more fish and you took it to Chilliwack and you brought back a big truckload of corn for your people. You traded again fish for what was it, elk, and you brought that again back to your people. You are a true person in your time. 50 years old, you've got a long ways to go. You're just a kid. And, you know, for what you bring to your, not only to your people, to the nation, of your ability of the making of a great chief, you really hold what to me of honoring your blanket. I thank you ever so much for that. And if there's anyone that has any questions, would like to have some new people asking, if you'd please put your hand up and ask Dave anything. And if not, we will be putting this Q&A with all four of them at the end of our last speaker. And if there's no one to put up their hand, I thank you again ever so much. You traveled very far. And I want to put up again the photo, Nika, to the one that you did, the painting of that you did in the last few days. If you can put that up for me, Nika. And this is what she's just finding it, and then we'll just get on there. This is what you've been up to the last few days, and you traveled very far and fast at 4 hours for you to get home to put on your computer and be with us tonight. I thank you so much for all what you have done. That is absolutely beautiful artwork. And David Knox, you see him, if you look up on his website, I'll put his contact down. And he is a chief, he is an artist, he is a man of many hats, a very well-spoken person for his people, going to COP15 and many more. He has been so busy since COP15, telling me so many meetings that have been invited to, and it hasn't ended. Of course, he's going to England. And thank you so much for that, and Tabi Masai. And so thank you for that. And so for our last, thank you, Nick. Thank you. For our last speaker, I'm going to put on Dst'hyl from our Wet'suwet'en Nation, Adam Gagnon. And we have gone through many things since we had our first speaker, and from all of what we have gone through for this evening, we have talked about sovereignty, we've talked about self-determination. Now we're going to go to LandBack, and none other than Dst'hyl, Adam Gagnon, who will be sharing with us the prisoner of conscience. Welcome, Adam. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marlene. Yeah, so I'll just take a minute to introduce myself there. My name is Chief Dst'hyl, and you know, it means the wake of a whale, you know, because we're very connected, as Scott said, you know, the coastal people there. In fact, a lot of the Wet'suwet'en culture came from the coast, and you know, we borrowed it, and it was moving inland into the Lanotane and the Carriacicani. But I mean, one of the things that happened is me being Chief Dst'hyl, you know, I'm from the Sun House of the Laksamasu clan, and we have 3 houses in our clan, and it's we have Twisted House, Sun House, and Owl House, and we have lots of origin stories as well. You know, that we as the Laksamasu or Dst'hyl, we come from the people from the sky, and that's always in our dogs. So we have similar stories there to all of the people across BC because of all of our trading. You look at the coastal trading from all of the Ooligan trail, the grease trails that we've had, and they go to every part of BC basically, you know, where we traded our dry goods there for, you know, all of the, you know, the Ooligan grease and Ooligans and seafoods there that we were just so wealthy in the old days. But anyway, going from that, I just want to go through a brief history of the Wet'suwet'en. You know, like we've been with the Gagnon and the Wet'suwet'en and the Tsimshian. We've been in this fight there for 240 years, and throughout that 240 years, one of the things that we had there was, Grand Trunk Railway came in, in 1950, 1920. And, our resistance to colonization goes way back, right to the beginning. And even in 1925, we ended up, we have the head delegate of chiefs that went all the way across Canada on the train, because the train just started. They traveled all the way across Canada, and what they wanted to do was have an audience with the Queen. And they got given the runaround when they got into Ottawa. At that time, they were with a priest, that was going to be speaking for them. And they got the runaround for several days, and then they got put back on a train and sent home again without ever getting an audience with the Queen. And this again happened back in the 50s there, where the Wet'suwet'en sent a delegated chiefs with one of their the chief counselor, which was a white person as well. And he was speaking on their behalf. And again, they tried to get a meeting that time with the prime minister, and it never ever happened. They ended up just getting turned around and sent home again after they got given the runaround a few days. So Canada, the willingness there to negotiate with First Nations people across Canada was never there, right from the get-go. The Canada claims, just close to 1 billion square kilometers, through the doctrine of discovery of First Nations land. So BC claims just under 1 million square kilometers of Indigenous lands. And it's all through the doctrine of discovery, which had been denounced by the Pope back, I think in the 90s sometime. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. And the thing that we're faced with is moving forward. Moving forward, like one of the things that within our history, we ended up, being, as I think it was Scott that was saying there, that we, through us being forced onto reserves, we ended up in a situation where, the government forced us onto reservations. They're basically creating entitlement. We suffered seven generations of entitlement, and our younger generation is going to take us several generations to get out of that whole entitlement, because a lot of our people become very complacent, and it's just a step towards colonization. And one of the things that we're faced with is, as a Wet'suwet'en, we're trying to teach our young children. We're bringing them out onto the territories, and we're teaching them how, to survive off what's left of our land, because we got a 14% overcut of timber on all of the Wet'suwet'en territory. We got 3 forest districts on our territory, and we got 22,000 square kilometers. When you look at the 22,000 square kilometers that we claim, in comparison to BC, that's 2.3% of British Columbia. And you look at the Navajo. The Navajo, the U.S. government gave them, 71,000 square kilometers, in Arizona. So you look at, BC doesn't want to recognize any in First Nations land. And you're talking about all of these modern day treaties that happen. The reason the Wet'suwet'en haven't entered into a treaty is because after Delgamuukw, we ended up going into negotiations with the province and the feds. And they were using unfair negotiating tactics right from the get-go. What they did is they did not want to abandon their land selection model, which is 5%. And towards the end, they were pushing it towards 7%. But they wanted us to, forego, 93 to 95% of our territory, just give it to them. after we spent, $13 million going to bringing the whole Delgamuukw case to court. And the Hanamook there, Don Ryan, was the orchestrator of Delgamuukw there. And he started in 1970 when he just came fresh out of university and organized, all of our hereditary chiefs. So it was the uniqueness of it. It was, a hereditary governance there that was bringing the federal and provincial government to court. Whereas, one of the things there that happened with the Chilcotin Treaty. The Chilcotin Treaty was brought forth by a band, and they immediately accepted the 5% land selection model. So it was really easy for a judge to give them, sign off on their treaty and giving them their traditional lands back. But like I said, they forego huge amounts, and the same with the other treaties as well. They're dealing with the band councils, and one of the things that the Wet'suwet'en are faced with, the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs, is we got band councils that are moving contrary to the hereditary structure, and it's being pushed by the province and the federal government. What they're doing is they're telling industry to deal only with the band councils, not to deal with the hereditary chiefs. But in Delgamuukw, it was very, very clearly spelled out there that, all of the negotiations have to go through, the hereditary structure, because that was the hereditary chiefs that won that court case. And, so what we did from 1997, when we had that ruling, to 2003, is we negotiated, but because of the unfair negotiating tactics, we pulled out of the negotiation. And since then, the government just basically went full out on the extraction of all of the Wet'suwet'en territory. They deregulated, basically all of the forest mining, everything, and gave all of the control to the big corporations. So basically, all the government workers became, dogs with no teeth. There was no more enforcement. They were just basically an approval agency, just run everything through. And then they created that Oil and Gas Commission, which was a really bogus commission. And then they put archaeology underneath it. And then they put, all they're doing is just signing off on all of the water rights and signing off on, all of the permits, and not talking to any of the hereditary chiefs about what is happening on the land, not getting permission before they sign off on these permits. So you're looking at, all of the UNDRIP and everything else, it just became a smokescreen, where it's just, the willingness, they fake the willingness, to just appease, the populace. So these are the problems that we're faced with there as Wet'suwet'en people. So they wanted us to forego even our land again. They signed that MOU, which recognized our 22,000 square kilometers. But because they're negotiating with other bands in the Wet'suwet'en Nation, what they're saying there is that, they want to change the wording of it there. So to say all Wet'suwet'en lands there, so that these bands could negotiate separately for their lands. But one of the things that being a hereditary chief, every single member of those other bands belong to a host group, whether it's the Gagnon, Laxiliu, Laxamasiu, Sayu, Gatlehu, they all belong to a clan. So when they're negotiating with the government, they should be negotiating through their appropriate house groups and clans in order to have their message heard, not try to go through band council to do the negotiations, because the band councils, it's a really fickle government in Wet'suwet'en and Wet'suwet'en. They're kicked out every 2 years. They get in there, and every 2 years. So there's no continuity at all. Where with the hereditary chiefs, we go back thousands of years, and there's so much accountability, and we're able, to see what's happening. It doesn't move as quick as the Euro Canadians system, but at least nobody gets left behind. You know, in our feast hall, that's our governance. You know, we our governance has been there forever, and it's like Scott was saying, we've been around for thousands of years, and you know, I really admired, you know, all of the stuff that Russ said as well. You know, he's very knowledgeable, and David as well. You know, he's you know, everybody is working, and we're all pulling in the same direction. You know, so the Gagnon and Wet'suwet'en, you know, we've always like been one. We considered ourselves as one. You know, and that's why we ended up going through initiating the Delgamuukw court case as the Gagnon and the Wet'suwet'en. Because Delgamuukw is one of the high Gagnon chiefs. So when you're looking at all of this, it's very important for us, you know, to come up with a strategy which is going to be, you know, as a Wet'suwet'en, we've been fighting so hard for so long, you know, that it is exhausting at times, because, and it's not all of the Wet'suwet'en, it's just the hereditary chiefs with, you know, small numbers of their clans that are taken up to fight. You know, we have from Unistoten, we have the Dark House, and they've been very, very, you know, assertive on protecting their lands up, you know, on the western front of our territory, and Gidimden as well. Gidimden, you know, they've been really assertive, you know, between Frida and Molly Wickham, you know, they've been just incredible. You know, they've just been out front and center and resisting the colonization and the destruction of our territory. The territory that we have, you know, like TC Energy never ever came to the hereditary chiefs, and everybody knows across Canada that you know, they dealt only with the band councils, and then the band councils were not even given a choice. You know, they were given an ultimatum. This is they said, we have all of the permits, and we're gonna, the pipeline's going ahead regardless if you guys sign on to benefit agreements or not. If but the pipeline is going ahead. So if you guys want to get your millions of dollars there, you got to sign off to the benefit packages. So even the band councils were not even given a choice, and a lot of them, you know, they just immediately took it there without any questioning it. Even though in Wet'suwet'en there we had a community meeting, and there was over 70% of the people that voted against CGL, and the band council basically held an in-camera meeting and got just barely a quorum and signed off on the CGL. So these are things that happen. You know, there's you know, there's corruption at every level of government. You know, even in our you know, puppet governments of the band council there that were put in by the colonizers. See, the biggest problem that we're faced with there, and I think it was put very eloquently there with Scott there, is that you know, the band councils were created there to assimilate us, and one of the problems that we're faced with is once they put us on reserves, they started they were working and coherent with the Catholic Church and the other churches as well. You know, they worked basically in concert to basically register all of us, turning us all into you know, legal Indians. You know, like what once we got a band council number or a status number, you know, they proclaimed us legal Indians. So and most of our people have bought into that whole legal Indian concept, as opposed to looking at their hereditary structure in the background and falling back on that. Because when I was just saying a little bit about our potlatch system, for example, our potlatch system has been around for thousands of years. That's our governance, and that's our taxation structure. One of the things that we were accused of forever is not paying taxes. But little, you know, did the Euro-Canadians know that we have the most fair taxation system on the planet. And it stems all the way through the coastal Salish, right through the Haida, and everybody that did feasting. our taxes were paid in the feast hall. And the wealthiest chiefs that amassed the most wealth paid the highest taxes because they had to contribute massive amounts of goods to maintain their chief name. So the people that couldn't afford taxes, they paid with labor. They did all of the labor in the feast halls, and they made their contributions in that sense. But you look at all of the clans today, everybody's contributing to pay their taxes, in our own governance structure. And it's important, for us to recognize that. And, when you see our colonizers saying, oh, those Indians, they're so entitled and they don't pay taxes, all of that was enforced. It was forced on us, for, the last 100+ years. So it's really important for us to recognize there that, I love the idea, that, between David and Scott and Russ there, the things that they said, and how we have to come together as a nation, because as Wet'suwet'en and Gagnon, we never look at ourselves as part of Canada ever. We look at ourselves, our territory as a separate country from Canada. And I think that's the way, we have to move forward, is keeping ourselves separate from Canada, not amalgamating, because Canada would love for us to amalgamate and be a part of, how they want to control us in order to keep extracting all of our resources. And that's not what we want. And that's why, that the MOU was the first time ever that Canada and BC has recognized our title and rights. And yet the willingness to sign it off is not there. Because one of the things that we're faced with is they're still trying to, just negotiate, everything more in favor of themselves. They try to, make us, take compensation out of the package. Our chiefs said no and walked away from the table. So they had to put a compensation package back into the MOU. And you look at, the lands now, they're saying they don't want to recognize the 22,000. So, we're trying to enforce upon them that, yes, the 22,000 square kilometers is our territory. That's what we're going to sign off on. And I think it's really important there that we don't, I'm glad that we didn't follow any of the other treaty process where they arbitrarily accepted, 5% of their traditional lands in order with enough money, just to carry them for a few years. So these are problems that we're faced with there. So, we tried to intervene on one of the treaties there and got shut down. So these are things that, we have to keep in mind. So it's just kind of a brief history of what we're doing. And, right now, with our fight against CGL, it brought, a huge recognition there to the Wet'suwet'en, because we had such shut down Canada that with people right across Canada, just all, just came together and, they made it so that that MOU was possible. Prior to that, the government had no willingness to negotiate or even talk or even come to the table. But when Canada got shut down and they started hurting, their pocket, the shipping routes, that changed everything. The game changed. And now, we have an MOU that's just kind of sitting stagnant. And it's important for us to realize there that the federal government and the provincial government both have the power, to do a declaration giving us the 22,000 square kilometers. But the unwillingness is still there, to negotiate fairly. They want to chisel back and, take more and more of our traditional lands. So it's really important for us to come together as nations across BC and, stand together like we have been doing and supporting one another. And you look at what happened, to the people fighting the pipeline, Tiny House and all of their warriors there, how, the police treated them was pretty, it was really awful, to see and hear all of the things that went down there. And then the thing is the same with Fairy Creek, you know, the brutalization there of the people there, you know, it's just not called for, you know, and the lethal task force against the Wet'suwet'en, you know, where they were, I always say they were trying to, you know, create a situation, you know, to force us into retaliation, you know, so they were trying to provoke us into violence. And that's one of the things that we would not, as chiefs, agree to. You know, we decided to take the moral high road and, you know, beat them with big spirits as opposed to beating them with, you know, guns where they have the advantage, and they would have just eradicated all of us, you know, if we would have showed any violence in any way, shape, or form. So, you know, with this, you know, the stuff that's been happening with me recently, you know, I'm really, really pleased, you know, that Amnesty International has taken, you know, a role in pursuing, you know, the unjust treatment of the Wet'suwet'en, you know, throughout history and, you know, right into the present. So I think, you know, that brings, you know, our cause right onto the world stage, and people are going to start coming together, and, you know, there's going to be more pressure on Canada for them to do, you know, a declaration of ownership there for all of our 22,000 square kilometers. And I think all of the nations should be pushing for a similar type of, you know, resolution on their lands as well, not just the Wet'suwet'en. But I think, you know, the Carriers, the County, and the Gagnon are already doing it. They're right in concert with the Wet'suwet'en. But if the Tsimshian and other nations move forward, because Gagnon as well is, you know, even in my court case there where I did the appeal against my, you know, my charges. So we're going to have interveners. The Gagnon will intervene on that case, and also Gagnon will intervene, and there's also other interveners that want to come in and support, you know, the fact that, you know, our laws have been around for thousands of years and should be recognized and trusted, you know, like everything I did under the Wet'suwet'en law of trespass. And what I did is was a really watered down version of our trespass laws, because originally our trespass laws involved capital punishment, and capital punishment, there usually people were given one warning, and if they did not comply and came back and did the same offense twice, they were usually shot. And the person, you know, that did the justice would have to wear a red armband on his shoulder. So if anybody was missing somebody, you know, everybody pointed to the caretaker of that territory that's wearing a red armband. And what he would do is he would bring them out onto the land so they could look after their loved one with respect and do whatever they can. And then usually there was feasting after that, where, you know, the clan that had, you know, the offense committed against there, the other clan would have to come up with some sort of a restitution to make sure that would never happen again. So they would usually hold a feast, and then they would come into some sort of, it's a reconciliation feast, and they would come into some means of reconciling their differences so that those type of things never happened again. But with ignorance of the Euro-Canadians, we couldn't just do that, you know, so we had to have a really watered down version. And that's the reason why our clan decided that we were going to seize assets from CGL. And that's what I did. I seized like 13 assets. And that's when the RCMP came and arrested me, and, you know, for breach of any injunction, you know, which was what we think was a very illegal injunction anyway, because, you know, all the stuff that we had from Delgamuukw, the magistrate would not entertain, you know, when she gave CGL the injunction. So the injunction basically is just a battering ram. Like, injunctions serve no purpose legally. All of the injunctions do, it's for industry, and they only serve to perpetuate the problem, of the unwillingness, to negotiate fairly. And so these are the type of situations and that we're faced with. So, and that's not just Wet'suwet'en are faced with it. I think it's all of the bands and different nations right across BC and Canada. So like I said, if you compare Wet'suwet'en 22,000 square kilometers to Canada, it's 0.00037% of Canada. So it's like a speck, and yet the unwillingness to treat us fairly is just not there. So I don't know if there's anything else, Marlene, that you wanted to me to talk about.
You so much. I thank you so much, Dst'hyl. I believe that what we did speak about yourself and myself for the last 2 weeks, your transcript, which the judge passed down to you, the sentencing from there was compelling. He had so much admiration for you when he passed down your sentence. But even still, somebody sees that still as wrong. You're on your own land. You did the right thing. The judge said so. And 2.5 weeks later, you get a call from Amnesty stating that this could happen for you. And they had to call head office in London. And from there on, it's history, where you are now the first person who is shaming Canada for putting you in jail in your own house on your own land. And it has to be unlifted. It's true. It is quite the story that you have, and I really applaud Amnesty for coming up behind you for doing what they did. It was a shock when I heard it, but then not so much of a shock being an activist, and very applaudable to the many people behind you as Indigenous people who, like you said, are falling in the same category. A lot more are still going up for trial in this next coming year. And hopefully that would, like they did say it will happen with them as well. But you are the first for this to have this recognition. And going from there, I'm sure the judge is probably going to just do that, wanting to be behind Canada to do the right thing. Masai, I would like to know if anyone has some questions for Dst'hyl and for Adam Gagnon. So please raise your hands, and if we could have some new people asking questions. If not, I think we're going to put the 4 of you on now. And Nikta? I want to thank Nikta. She has been my co-host for tonight. We just met a few days ago on a huge big Zoom, and for her to come on to be the co-host, it's commendable. She's looking right across from the lake where she lives, right at a big fire. She's just like everyone in BC, and is happy to be doing this because it's taken her mind off of many other things. And Howard Breen is saying, beyond grateful to all the speakers, sparkling words that drown out the darkness of those seeking to extinguish sovereignty, title, and rights. Special appreciation to the hosts who blessed us with the best of the best webinars. Thank you so much, Howard, for saying that. And we just have do we have the 2 other speakers on still here? David Knox and also Scott is still here.
Yes, I am.
Okay, so we'll have you to put all of your pictures up. Nika is working on it. There we are. Hi, Scott. And we've got one more, David Knox. There we are. Let's applaud the 4 most amazing speakers of all time and on this webinar that I've been doing since 2019. You have really reached beyond a shadow of the doubt. When I first started speaking to you all about a week ago, and I remember thinking it was, I don't know which one of you says, nobody really says no to you, Marlene, which I'm glad you did. And my biggest, thank you to each and every one of you for what you have contributed to what we call the title. And speak to each other, thank each other. And we want to listen from all of you, each and every one of you, for putting out self-determination, land back, and sovereignty. and we'll just be the listeners.
So Marlene, I'd like to say something if I could.
Absolutely.
For Adam, Chief, how do you say it? Styles?
Sahil?
Dst'hyl? Dst'hyl. So, I want to tell a little story here. I was working, I think it was a December, after the police came in and, used a chainsaw to bring down the door and everything. And that was on national TV. I was working with a chief from BC and one from Quebec. We were trying to get a resolution passed to force AFN to support your struggle. And they were wanting AFN to direct AFN, the national chief and the executive, to go after the federal government and after the police to stop them from using the violence. And the problem was AFN is an Indian Act Chiefs organization, as you know. And I forget her name, one of the Wet'suwet'en chiefs opposed the resolution. And they got Terry TG involved, the BC regional chief. And they objected to the resolution to hit the floor for the chiefs to even discuss. They did this was all a virtual meeting, because AFN could control the mics and everything. This is during the pandemic, right? I think it was in December 2020, I think that was, or something like that. Maybe 2021. I think it was 2020. Because isn't that when they shut down pretty much most of the country was in 2020. So was that time, I think. Anyways, I wanted to point that out that, AFN is an Indian Act Chiefs organization. They would not, one of the elected Indian Act chiefs, the Wet'suwet'en ones, and the regional chief from BC would not allow that resolution to be discussed by the chiefs. And this played out in video, right? Because it was a virtual assembly. It wasn't an actual meeting. It would have been different, I think, if people lined up at the mics then. But it was a virtual meeting. And I just wanted to point that out, that they wouldn't allow that resolution to direct the national chief and executive to support you. And I thought that was really bad, and that's one of the problems we have, because I come from Ganawage. We have traditional governments too, and I'm working on an advisory group for the Ganawage Governance Project, where we're talking about a model of governance for Ganawage that would be based on our traditional system. We haven't gotten to that point of talking about that model, but I'm hoping that our traditional government, our elective system, will talk about that for the benefit of the community, because we need to do something to push back against this municipal self-government policy that they're pushing everybody into, and how they're doing the divide and conquer against us. So that's why I think we need to get this into a people's movement, because they've co-opted AFN, they've co-opted the other chiefs organizations, because that's what they are, as Indian Act Chiefs organizations. And in order to move ahead, I think we got to do something about that. But I wanted to tell that story because, I wanted you to know that we tried. I worked with the chiefs to draft the resolution to try and get, Roseanne Archibald was national chief then. And I'm sure she wanted to do something, but her mandates, were coming from the chief's resolutions. And it was Terry TG and one of the, I can't remember her name. She's a woman elected Wet'suwet'en chief. She intervened to stop it from happening. Anyway, I just wanted to let you know that, that there were chiefs that were supporting you and tried to do something, but they got shut down at AFN.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is all news to me, so.
Thank you for sharing that, Russell. And Scott and David, if you want to jump in, please do.
Yeah, Scott, you could go first. It's all good.
Okay.
Well, you want me to go? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate this opportunity, Marlene. I heard David say that he has some Maori folks coming up here. So David, let's talk soon. Maybe we can organize an event somewhere and bring in a bunch of hereditary chiefs from the other areas and just get organized. But what I really want to do, Marlene, is I want to bring together a whole bunch of the folks and the folks that are on this call here, as well as the others that were mentioned here, because we have to find a way to unite our efforts in a format that's going to be effective to preserve the struggle for our next generations. And that's critical. That's just critical. We're all fighting the good fight in isolation. We're all getting attacked by those that benefit from this process. And we have so much education that we've got to get out to the folks. And so I intend to, in probably relatively short order in the next couple of months, organize an event somewhere on Vancouver Island with the explicit intent to bring together these folks and find ways that common ground that we can move forward on our common agendas and hold the colonial state accountable. Again, when I spoke here in the beginning, my audience isn't out there. My audience are the folks on this call, the allies, the non-Indigenous allies that really want to make a meaningful commitment to a sustainable resistance to the neo-colonialism imposed upon our people. And so I hope that David, I'm sure you and I'll be talking very soon, but I would like, Russ, this is an invite for you, as well as you, Adam, and others that, in a couple, it's going to be short order, but I want to get this done in relatively short order so that we can look at how we can collaborate. Again, I put my hands up in appreciation for the format, Aichka, and look forward to follow up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Scott and David. Hi.
Yeah. I'll just, one thing my Uncle Tony taught me is to educate yourself, know what you're talking about, speak it once, speak it loud, don't utter gibberish, don't be long-winded. Anyway, this is amazing. Like, the networking system since COP15 has changed my life. 10 years ago, my father died. I staked claim to his hereditary chieftainship, hereditary rights, and I've been groomed since a young boy. And I just know it just comes natural. And from there, 8 years, 2 years transition, 8 years devoted, but full years hardcore working with the government, battling the government against Indian Act. And just recently, last November, I got on band council. So now I wear two different hats. I'm a hereditary chief. I'm also on Indian Act Band Council. So I bring a different flavor to the table. We passed put forward resolution to save the bear dens more. So now there's more of a buffer zone, and now I had all these scientists come up this way doing this field work that's so needed. And ever since COP15, I did 12 conferences all on my own, but things are paid for just so you pay your way. But if I was, because the Indian Act wouldn't help me, but I'm gathering so much data for my people, for Rupert, for our 5 watersheds, and self-determination, because it's our right, our responsibility, why we man up to do what we do as human beings, looking after, sharing, caring. And I don't know how to fathom it. I'm just so honored. Now we're all networking. Now we're all speaking with that voice. So let's not give the government satisfaction and be individualism anymore, because this whole Pacific Coast Rim, we were all as one through intermarriage before time immemorial, going way back. So on this note, I'll pause. It's been an honor. Just like I just love being us. Let's make things right. How do we make so wrongs to make it right? It's to work together, find those objectives, and amplify it. And it's all about the youth. The youth are our future. So now we got to breed this whole new different batch of beautiful humans and breed them with these old morals, traditions, values, principle, and protocol, and not being colonized. I hate to say it, but it's been 2 centuries. The East Coast had it worst. There were 550 years. We on this West Coast is a little over 2 centuries. But happy thoughts, and you always got to embrace happy thoughts. And thank you, and we'll chat soon.
Thank you ever so much, David Knox, and Adam, Chief Sahai are going to give you the last word, okay? And after that, I've got some messages that I went to read in the chat line to all of you. You're on mute. Yeah, just take yourself off of mute. There you go.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you, Marlene, for bringing us all together, because it was really fascinating to me, being between Russ and Scott and Dave there. We have like-minded people there that are all working towards the same thing, and I think it's really important there that the networking is going to be really important in the future, because that's where one person has no power, but when you congregate and come together and you're all pushing in the same direction, that's when changes are coming, and it's inevitable. And the only thing that I would say, Scott has a really wonderful thing of getting all of the chiefs from all different nations coming over. I just wanted to mention, as long as it's after September 3rd, because that's when I'm free. Yeah, so that's when my incarceration is over. Yeah. So anyway, thank you so much, all of you. And my love to everyone, every last one of you that's there and listening in. Thank you so
Howdy,
much.
Messiah. I'm
Yeah.
going to read you some of them. Fiona McMurran, I'm going to read yours. You have non-Indigenous allies out here who like to have information we can share to inform others. Those of us who have been protesting on behalf of the Palestinians have really started to understand just how evil colonization is, and how it is incumbent on all of us to fight for the rights and genuine self-determination of all colonized peoples, but particularly those whose land we settlers occupy, which is so true. Thank you for that. Dias, thank you for this very informative panel. I learned so much from everyone. And Christian Labrec, feel the same. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. And I also put up on the website, so this will be recorded and tomorrow, and you can have access to it on Marlene's Solar Day webinar, and this will also be put onto YouTube. And then also the next message is from, hang on a second. Somehow an ally, I was impressed and well informed by the quality of the presentations and the related debate. Somehow I feel the group has very every chance to break a new trail on your way to emancipation. Thank you for letting me sit in. It was a real privilege, says Steve. I can't pronounce your last name. Maybe Russell, you know him? Sepulchre. And thank you for that message. And then also to Stephen Lloyd, thank you all. And it was very informative, very impressive. And it just goes, my hands are so wet, I'm trying to scroll on this because it's like 40 in where the room I'm in right now. And also, Russell, you put in all of your contact information and that you have on there. And one more that I've got, I think you just put that out there already before. And if you can see any more messages from me, Nick, if you can help me out, because my hands are so wet I can't scroll my scroll. And so I think I will just let that go. And then so earlier on when I first started this, there's a person that was meeting that this is being recorded by AI. Does anybody know who Otter AI is? Russ, I was asking you that earlier. I don't know if you got to know that. I didn't know who that was.
No, I don't know. I don't
It's
know
an
who that is.
automatic program.
And who had the automatic program?
No, it's Zoom that has it now. So every time you have a meeting, it gives you like an AI report after, which is sort of creepy.
Okay, thank you for that.
It does, but
so
it summarizes it and then talks about everybody and their
Okay,
ideas.
thank you, Gina, for that message. That would be great. Wonderful to hear that. And so I want to say again, I want to thank each and every one of you. Russ Diabo, we have had so many topics about this in the last year or so of how we are going to get the word out to the nation. And it's finally you got your say on so many things because we're running out of time. And like you have said so many times before that, you know, I didn't know a way to get a whole bunch of people together and to, it was now we've got the platform and you four are going to carry this on and you have me, you know, to help you along the way. And I want to say thank you again very much for all the people who have attended. And thank you everyone so much for also taking the time to share this. We had 49 shares at the end of the day. And thanks to all these organizations across Canada who have gotten together and really knowing and understanding that this is the time in our lives that we have to get a nation-to-nation discussion, and this is just the beginning. And we can invite more chiefs. We can have the Maoris. We will have many more nations and people and leaders like yourself. Masai, and I want to say thank you ever so much for your coming on and making this a momentous night. I know that we went over, but it is all good. We had a lot of people coming in, and thank you much, and safe travels. David, I'm glad you're home
Hey,
safe.
Marlene, I got one more fast comment, because how I met Marlene was at COP15. And also I work with another organization called RAD, Restore, Assert, Defend. The West Coast to New Brunswick, there's roughly 140 of us. Indigenous led, and also with NGOs, working with Indigenous led from west to the East Coast. If you type in RAD online, check them out. I'm a part of it since COP15 also. And now there's so many great stuff percolating, and it's time to take these next steps to educate, make awareness, and then things will happen once we heal our land. We the people will heal with it. But it is not, thank you.
And David Knox, you know, that's what COP15 is about, because what you did was you took the platform to the world, and that's what it's about. I sat on many panels, and there wasn't a lot of Indigenous people at COP15, and I said, I'm here to add, and I have a lot of questions to ask, and I was at every panel. I was in their face, in their countries, talking to them. You know, French, English, saying it in my language, no matter how it was that they really needed to say. You did put a lot of panels, you did a lot of work at COP15, and you're still really hard at it, and it's so much appreciated. And Scott Clark as well, you are a person to be reckoned with. And Russ Diabo, I still, you know, you are the one person, you said you met Howard Breen. Between the two of you, I get a lot of information every day, and I do read what I can, actually. And Dst'hyl, love you. Love all of you. Thank you, everybody, and good night. And we'll just say that say this good night, and we will end this, and have a good rest of the weekend, and take care. Bye.
Okay, good night.
Thank you.
Good
Bye.
night.